take over this government. You can hear it east, north, south, and west. People calling for the best. Granger, we want you as president.
Hello again, Guyana, and welcome to the Public Interest. I am Malaika Ramsey. Thank you very much for joining us for another informative edition. With me is Leader of the People's National Congress Reform and Leader of the Opposition, Brigadier the Honorable David Granger. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Malaika.
All right. Great to have you, and I should let the public know that soon we won't be referring to him as the Leader of the Opposition, as we're preparing to see the complete end of the 10th Parliament. As you know by now, Mr. Donald Ramotar has recently announced that the 28th of February, that Saturday the 28th of February, will be the day that the Parliament, Guyana's Parliament, is completely dissolved. And of course, a Partnership for National Unity is calling that a troubled 3-year tenure of Mr. Ramotar's time in office. Brigadier, how has the announcement by the President to dissolve the Parliament on the 28th of February further show that there has been a damage to the 10th Parliament and democracy in our country?
Well, Malaika, the dissolution, which is expected to be announced or will take place on the 28th of February, has been long in coming. It's been occurring, I would say, in slow motion, because since November, the entire population knew that sooner or later there would be dissolution. Starting on the 10th of November, we had the actual prorogation. Then, of course, it was the 6th of December broadcast. And all along, people have been telling him, look, get on with it. You know, if you're going to dissolve Parliament, and not keep the entire nation in suspense. It has damaged democracy because in 2011, the entire country went to the polls expecting a 5-year term. The people voted for a majority. They gave a majority of Partnership and National Unity and the Alliance for Change. And they expected that that parliamentary majority would deliver a certain dividend to them. They wanted good governance. They wanted the reduction in poverty. They wanted certain things. 5 years have not elapsed, and Mr. Ramotar and the PPP have now brought the 10th Parliament crashing down. So it's a huge disappointment to the people who went to the polls a little over 3 years ago. And I think they're going to punish the PPP for this breach of faith. It's a breach of faith because the Constitution calls for a 5-year tour of office, and Mr. Ramotar is bringing it down within a little more than 3 years.
Given all that you've said and all that this damage we saw taking place in the 10th Parliament, how confident do you believe are Guyanese when it comes to the PPP, and how confident are they when it comes to the opposition, especially now that there is an alliance between APNU and the AFC?
Well, the confidence has shifted much more heavily in favor of the opposition. That shift was noticeable in November 2011 when the PPP received for the first time in 21 years a minority of the vote in the National Assembly, a minority of the popular vote. Confidence has grown because the PPP has continued to make blunder after blunder under President Ramotar, particularly at the level of Parliament. And I do believe that they feel that it is not just an administrative blunder, it is a constitutional blunder, because the President has actually prevented the Constitution from functioning in the interests of democracy.
Given all that has happened in the 10th Parliament, is it fair to say that Mr. Donald Ramotar can probably go down as the worst president Guyana has ever seen?
Certainly the most undemocratic. He has shot himself in the foot. He is cutting his own tenure short. I would say yes. He has not really attempted to embark on a serious program of national development. And at the same time, he has embarked on a program of destruction of democracy inside of the Parliament. More than any other president, he has destroyed parliamentary democracy.
How has this destruction of parliamentary democracy, has it contributed to, especially PPP government ministers, not doing what they should have been doing in the National Assembly?
Widely, yes. In the first instance, I would say that the crisis that we're in now, the political crisis that we're in now, is a deliberate attempt to avoid sanctions being brought against, particularly Minister Ashni Singh, who is the Minister of Finance, and possibly Minister of Legal Affairs, Mr. Anil Nandalal. But certainly their behavior in the National Assembly was leading towards another vote of no confidence. And I believe that the dissolution of Parliament is one of the measures by the PPP that have been applied in order to avoid these ministers being sanctioned. So yes, confidence is drained away, and the president is probably trying to protect his ministers. But it's too late. I think people know very well what has happened, particularly in the realm of financial expenditure. And right now, the courts have actually ruled that the expenditure of the money, the several $billion by the Minister of Finance, was illegal. So yes, the confidence is drained away from the PPP.
While, as you said, Mr. Ramotar seems to have been trying to protect his ministers, let's talk about some of his advisors for a bit. Is it also fair to say that Mr. Ramotar's advisors would have probably erred in terms of guiding him in terms of our constitution and what should have really happened in the 10th Parliament?
I don't know what advice he receives. What I would say is that he seems to be committed to following a perverse course in the Parliament, although he had been serving in the Parliament for several years as a member of the PPP. In particular, I'd like to refer to the fact that as early as June 2012, that is less than 6 months after the 10th Parliament had been convened, he actually announced, this is without the presence of his advisors, he actually announced at a ceremony for the progressive, for the women's progressive organization, that is the women's arm of the PPP, that he had no intention of giving assent to certain bills from the opposition. So I wouldn't blame his advisors. I think his own mindset contributed to this political crisis because he had no intention of behaving in a constitutional manner as president of this country.
You mentioned the high courts earlier, and of course the fact that Mr. Nandalal kept running to the high courts every time the opposition made a decision, especially regarding budget cuts. Are you satisfied that the high court did what it should have or should not have done in that situation or those situations?
Not entirely. The last ruling by the high court referred only to the expenditure in 2014, but there have been other issues referring to expenditure previously, which we are dissatisfied with. The court is separate from the Parliament, and the Parliament is separate from the executive. There are three branches of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branch. Now, given the fact that the Minister of Legal Affairs has been trying to take matters out of the legislative branch and ask the judicial branch to adjudicate, to that extent, I believe that the president himself would have been getting bad advice. And I do believe that it was an aberration. It was a political aberration. But the last ruling insists that matters that affect the legislative branch must be resolved by the legislative branch. And the judicial branch has no authority to interfere with the functioning of the legislative branch.
In the event that APNU-AFC coalition ends up to be in the same position where we see the PPP now in terms of being a minority government, how will you convince the Guyanese public that what they saw with PPP as a minority government, we will not see with APNU-AFC as a minority government in the Parliament?
Well, I think given the situation on the ground, and I'm on the ground quite frequently, listening and speaking with people, it's unlikely that we would get a minority, that APNU and AFC combined would get a minority. That's the first instance. In the second instance, we want to establish a government of national unity, and we feel that this mere promotion of inclusionary democracy will ensure that we have a more consensual 11th Parliament, that it wouldn't be marked or characterized by the type of confrontation and conflict that we saw in the 10th Parliament. For example, from 2012, I've been calling for a tripartite budget committee. Once the 11th Parliament is convened, I will establish a tripartite budget committee. So there will be no danger of a car crash or a collision. We wouldn't agree on everything, but all three parties must sit down and plan how this country is to be administered. That is what we're aiming at.
Apart from, you just said it, an APNU AFC government, of course, majority government would have a tripartite budget committee. Apart from having that, what are some of the immediate changes, well, constitutional changes, of course, you will make in terms of the Parliament so that we can indeed have a better 11th Parliament?
Well, we don't have a schedule of changes, but certainly, apart from the tripartite budget committee, we want to have a parliamentary office of budget. The committee is just a discussion among the three political parties, but Parliament must have an office of budget. The second thing, Parliament must have its own legal counsel. It must have an office of legal counsel. So those are the major changes that I would see in a short period, and that wouldn't require constitutional amendment. As far as the constitutional reform is concerned, APNU and AFC will set up a constitutional commission to go back to the people so that any other changes in the powers of the president, for example, will be made through that commission.
Earlier you talked about Mr. Ramotar trying to protect his ministers, of course, by creating all scenarios for them to avoid being sanctioned. Under an APNU AFC government, especially if these persons who are ministers now become parliamentarians on the PPP, how doable, how would you facilitate sanctioning them? Because these are basically crimes that they're committed against society. How do we deal with that?
Well, once offenses have been committed, if they have been committed in the public domain, that's a criminal matter. But it is my understanding that matters which came up in any parliament come to an end when that parliament comes to an end. So they would have to be reintroduced afresh in the 11th parliament. So there's no carryover from the 10th to the 11th parliament automatically. Any new matter that we need to bring to the Parliament has to have occurred within the 11th Parliament. That's my understanding. So, in a way, Mr. Ramotar has achieved the washing off of some of the trespasses of his ministers by bringing the Parliament to an end on the 28th of February.
In an 11th Parliament, can we, you did say yes, we have to start afresh, but in starting afresh, there would have been issues that would have came up in the 10th Parliament that we saw no solutions and they were not dealt with extensively. Can we look forward to seeing any matter, any motion that would have been raised in the 10th Parliament coming up under an APNU AFC administration?
Exactly, that's why we introduced those motions in the first place. Some bills have not been assented to, they will now be reintroduced. Bills concerning the president's pension and all that. We had introduced matters dealing with other, humanitarian things, and of course the deaths of persons during the troubles on the East Coast and elsewhere. So there are lots of matters which will be brought back into the 11th Parliament, particularly on grounds of civil rights and humanitarian issues.
Sir, as we prepare to put a wrap on this program, I'd like to give you an opportunity to call on the Guyanese public to, in a sense, support APNU and AFC as they want to see a better parliament when we have an 11th Parliament.
Well, I would say the Cummingsburg Accord of Saturday, the 14th of February, was a landmark event, and it has brought into being an APNU AFC coalition. This coalition is committed to a government of national unity, and I call on all Guyanese people to support what they voted for in 2011, that is to say, a majority APNU AFC in the National Assembly, and now you have it. Let's vote for it, and let us make a government of national unity led by APNU and AFC.
Thank you very much, sir. Leader of the People's National Congress Reform and, of course, leader of the opposition, who is also the presidential candidate for a Partnership for National Unity and the Alliance for Change as we head to the 2015 regional and general elections. I am Malika Ramsey. Thank you very much for watching, and of course, join me again next time. Goodbye.
Take over this government. You can hear it east, north, south, and west. People calling for the best.